Hello, world history students. This is Mrs. Politsky. I have your notes for Chapter 11, Section 4, India and Southeast Asia. And we're going to start by kind of giving you a little bit of background, particularly with some of the different states within Southeast Asia. And we're going to kind of add to this as we go along and kind of put this in maybe a geographic perspective. But when we look at Vietnam, and we're primarily looking at kind of the era basically starting with the first century AD on up to about the Middle Ages. The thing to know is that India really, or Vietnam for the most part, really clung to its own identity. At some point in time, when the Chinese eventually tried to take over this region, they are kind of forced to have a state religion, and in this case, it was state Confucianism. The fact that the Vietnamese tried to expand southward into Malaya and eventually Indonesia. When we look at kind of our other regions within Southeast Asia, Angkor, Thai, and Burma, Angkor, we're kind of talking a little bit about what is kind of located in modern day Cambodia, but it became a very powerful state. The Thai people, they created a blend of political practices. You're going to see a little bit of monarchy here. And eventually our pagans, which are kind of located a little bit within what is modern day Burma or Myanmar, they played kind of an active role in sea trade. When we talk about Majapahit, uh, within part of the Malayan world, just so you know, this is actually an island which is now in part of Indonesia, but they incorporated most of the archipelago, and for the most part, they were Hindus because of the fact that we had uh, merchants or traders that were coming from the subcontinent that were bringing kind of their culture to this region. Eventually, we're going to have Muslim merchants that are going to convert this area. And today, when we talk about Indonesia, it's actually one of the fastest growing Muslim nations of the world. So, putting it in a geographic perspective, this is Vietnam, talking about Cambodia, which would include the Khmer people and kind of the side of Angkor Wat, which we're going to talk about. Thailand, talking about the Thais. When we talk about the pagans in Burma, Myanmar, and eventually talking about the Malayan world with the Majapahit. Their actual island, if you look further down, is kind of the area where you might see labeled Java, okay, or where the capital of Indonesia is, Jakarta. But this would include all this region that's kind of within this archipelago. So, and number one, some of the factors that influenced early civilizations in the region of Southeast Asia were the river delta of the Mekong. When we talk about the fact that it did support farming, primarily rice. We did have a mountainous region that did separate some of the different cultures within Southeast Asia. You had the monsoon season. When we talk about the Bay of Bengal, there are monsoons there, and certainly that could impact when trade could happen. And number two, India and China were able to influence Southeast Asians and their civilizations because they brought in religions such as Buddhism, Hinduism, and eventually Islam. They also influenced their architecture styles and ideas about writing and government and science and the arts. And when we take a look at this is again kind of referring back to some of our different civilizations that we were talking about. All right. Maratha, who was the king of the pagans, uh, united much of what is now Myanmar or Burma. When we talk about the Khmer, which would be people that were located in Cambodia, their achievements of their civilization, they were able to build many temples and buildings at Angkor, like Angkor Wat, which is a temple complex that was built kind of during the 12th century, and it is a Buddhist temple for the most part. They also created an irrigation system that covered about 12.5 million acres of land. When we talk about the downfall of the Khmer, Uh, this could be attributed to some of their expensive building projects when you talk about building irrigation systems and canals, and when you talk about building like the temples that they have there. Certainly, that consumes a lot of money. Plus, they had the fact that they had to defend themselves against outside attacks from invaders. And number six, in Vietnam, we have the Trung sisters, the oldest being Trung Trac and her younger sister Trung Nhi. These two sisters were, I would say, for the most part, they came kind of from the aristocracy, but eventually they were able to become the rulers of Vietnam for a very short period of time, starting around 8040 to about 8043. Trung Trac being the oldest of the sisters, she was queen, and her younger sister was kind of her provisionary. But needless to say, they ruled for about 3 years, um, give or take a few months. And they were known for trying to fight against the Chinese that were coming in, trying to dominate this region. They are considered to be heroes. Their father, for the most part, having daughters, did some things that were a little different. He educated them. They were also masters at the martial arts. In a way, she's kind of the makings of a Disney movie, if you think about it. But needless to say, they are considered to be heroes in Vietnam to this day. And one of the few examples that we have of women who were not only military fighters, but also rulers during this period of time. All right. And number seven, at the end of the 10th century, a group of rebellious Turk slaves founded an Islamic state in what is now present day Afghanistan, called what is now known as Ghazna. And their ruler happened to be a man named Muhammad Ghazna of Ghazna, and his people began to attack their neighbors, the neighboring Hindu kingdoms, and eventually were able to expand their territory into what is now present day India. Muhammad and his successors were able to establish what is known as a sultanate of Delhi. And as we go along and we start talking about modern day India, that's that remnant of Muhammad's empire is still there, because we have a number of people who live in the subcontinent who are Muslims, but also the fact that there is a blend of Hinduism and Sikhism and such. Number eight, in the latter half of the 14th century, we had a man named Timur Lenk, or sometimes known as Tamerlane by a lot of Europeans. He led his invaders, who were a mix of Mongols and Turks, into Delhi, okay, to kind of attack the Muhammad Empire. And he ended up massacring as many as 100,000 Hindu prisoners. That kind of gives Timur Lenk a kind of a bad boy image. The fact that he was kind of known as kind of being a bad guy, a murderer, kind of a tyrant in a sense. Uh, Needless to say, he was the ruler of a state based in what is now known as Samarkand, um, which is north of the Pamir Mountains, and was a menace to the region until his death in 1405. He's definitely a tyrant who's probably been kind of lost to a lot of historians because of the fact that, we focus more on the 20th century tyrants than we do the guys from the past. But he's up there. He was a bad guy. Anyway, over time, most Muslim leaders in India became tolerant of religious differences in this region because of the vast number of Hindus and the fact that they wouldn't be able to convert all of them. And so they had to get along. So, to kind of recap, when we talk about our region, we have our pagans that are in what is now present day Myanmar or Burma. Their notable leaders, you had Anuratha. Religious philosophy is Theravada Buddhism. And some of the challenges that they had was the declining power of their kings. The Khmer, which are located in modern day Cambodia along the Mekong River. You had some rulers such as Jaya Yaman the first and second. You also had the fact that they were predominantly Hindus. And eventually, the challenges, they had some expensive building projects. Eventually, they had some attacks. You have the Sriwijaya, which is primarily in Indonesia. Sumatra is being part of that. No notable rulers, but when you talk about religious philosophy, predominantly many of them were Buddhist. You also had some security from pirates that kind of were operating in this region. I think a lot of times when we think about pirating, we kind of focus in on the Caribbean and we can thank Disney for that. But pirating was very common in Southeast Asia and into parts of Eastern Asia, and we kind of tend to forget about that. But this was certainly a big issue for this region. Vietnam, when we talk about the modern day nation of that region, you have the Trung Trac and Trung Le sisters. You have Thai Taito, and Confucianism happened to be the big religion in that region. And the big challenges was resisting Chinese occupation. Thank you very much.